Good morning, folks. Welcome back to another episode of Mike's MMA Picks Fight Morning Quick Card Breakdown, brought to you by BetDSI as well as MMA Oddsbreaker. Before I get started, I just want to say thanks to everybody who's been a part of this ride so far. I've really enjoyed making these videos. It's been a labor of love, and I appreciate cultivating the relationships on Twitter and throughout social media, so I appreciate the support. Thank you. So let's get started here. We are headed to UFC Vancouver up in Canada. We've got 7 out of 12 fights that are expected to end inside the distance. Headliner, pretty sure that one should end inside the distance. We've got Justin Gaethje taking on Donald Cerrone at the top. That is going to be a banger. But before we get to that, we got to run through the other 11 fights on the card. We'll start in the lightweight division. We've got Hubbard-Prepolec taking on Austin Hubbard. Both of these fighters were dispatched by UFC talent in their previous matchups. Austin Hubbard coming in at $8,800 in DraftKings, which is a hefty price tag to pay for a -145 favorite. Hubbard-Prepolec, $7,400 plus 125 underdog. Last time we saw Hubbard-Prepolec, he fought hard for 3 rounds, took a lot of damage via leg kicks. Nordine Taleb was really going to the body and tearing him up. We didn't get to see Prepolec's whole game. I believe with a full fight camp here, you're looking at somebody who has 10 finishes on their record, 7 knockouts, never been knocked out, been around the block, has taken 6 losses, local fighter, Canadian. A couple of things I've liked when I watched him fight is he picks his spots, doesn't overextend himself, likes to dig to the body. Austin Hubbard, fighting out of Colorado, 10-3 overall record. Last time we saw him out, he was he exhibited some pretty hardy submission defense. He had Duffee-Hughes all over him. Few concerns in that fight though, where Duffee-Hughes was able to get off with his overhand right, and in the tape that I've watched, Austin Hubbard is there to be had on the feet. He's got some significant striking defense issues. When I watched the tape on Prepolec, this is Prepolec's fight against Nordine Taleb was actually at 170 pounds, so he's coming down to his natural weight of 155. Prepolec, he may be the more accurate striker here, and I think that although Hubbard has the movement, the guy trains with Corey Sandhagen, and you can see that in the movements that he mimics. The problem is though, besides the movement, he lacks a lot of the skills that Corey Sandhagen possesses. I see him trying out there to put on a pace. Hubbard's got a chin. This is a very closely lined fight. The book, in my eyes, it hasn't been completely written on Austin Hubbard yet. I do think that he should be the slight favorite here, though this is going to be taking place in Prepolec's backyard. We may see Hubbard with a full camp here, although his striking defense is atrocious. He may have implemented some new wrinkles into his game here. I'm going to have a slight lean on Hubbard in this spot. I think that his pace may be a difference maker here. I'd like to see what happens when this does hit the ground. We got to see Hubbard's submission defense. Prepolec is not known for being a submission grappler, so this is probably going to be a stand-up battle on the feet. Prepolec hasn't been KO'd, as I've previously mentioned, so I'm going to lean slightly to Austin Hubbard by decision. This fight is expected to go to a decision at minus 265. The slightest of leans to Hubbard. Next up, we've got Luis Smolka taking on Ryan MacDonald. Ryan MacDonald's coming in with the 2.5-inch reach advantage here. It's interesting to see Smolka fight a fighter who's a taller guy. He fought Mujeri, who is also a pretty tall fella. Luis Smolka fighting out of Team Oyama with Alex Perez. I like seeing that. They've got a good team over there. Smolka also has appeared to fill out his frame, although he's been taken down and out-muscled time and time again by fighters at 125, and I suspect it happens at 135. He's taking on Ryan MacDonald. Ryan MacDonald is $7,000 in DraftKings, plus 210 underdog, fighting out of Nebraska. This fight, 135 pounds. Smolka is one of the hardest fighters to trust. We know he's had, ever since that Moreno fight, man, he's had some major issues. He's admitted to struggling with alcohol throughout his UFC career. I really know these fighters, if you're going to be in this game, it's going to take 100% commitment, and at minus 260 for Smolka, he seems like he's coming off of that loss to Matt Schnell. This is a guy who, after losses, has locked himself in his room and just sat with the bottle for significant lengths of time. So I'm hoping that there hasn't been a relapse here. This fight is expected to go to a decision at minus 130. We know Smolka has the skills on the ground, and his scrambling is what you need in DraftKings. At 9,200, that's a high price to pay when you've got other fighters who look like they may have a safer path to victory up top there. But if you want to play with fire and if you're looking for high upside, Smolka has a tendency to put up some high scores in DraftKings when he wins. So he may come through with a submission here. I was watching MacDonald fight. This is a guy who he looked frozen under the bright lights against Chris Gutierrez. On the regional side of things, the guy was very impressive. He's got solid stand-up, throws in volume, ground game, yet to be determined, 10-1 record. I think he's going to be at a significant disadvantage on the ground with Smolka. But Smolka has very, very poor wrestling defense. I watched MacDonald get knocked down a few times on the regional scene, once against this fella Murphy. And long story short, my pick in this spot is going to be Luis Smolka by submission. You know, it's going against the grain a little bit because this fight is expected to go to a decision. Next up, we've got a fascinating bout at 145 pounds. We've got Jordan Griffin taking on Chaz Skelly. Chaz Skelly has been sitting on the sidelines for a while now, fighting out of Texas. 7,500 in DraftKings, plus 145 underdog Skelly, submission specialist with a solid wrestling background. I believe he was a state champion wrestler in Texas. Jordan Griffin, last time we saw him out, he was taking a loss to Dan Ige. Dan Ige, not very well. Dan Ige had a hell of a game plan there. He did not gas out. And Griffin was the guy coming in who I thought had the better gas tank. There's a motor. There's a motor on Griffin. Fighting out of Rufus Sport. Last time out, he had a home fight, and I felt bad for Felder, who was calling the fight. You could tell that he was pulling for his guy, but it just wasn't happening. Had some bright spots in that fight. So Griffin, 13 finishes on his record, something to pay attention to. 8,700 in DraftKings, minus 165 favorite right now. Skelly, you go back and watch his fight against against Mr. Knight. He's having success, and I believe suffered a fracture in that fight. But there have been other fights, especially against Elkins, etc. He reaches a point where he kind of breaks mentally late in fights. In the beginning of fights, I believe he's going to have a big advantage, especially in the wrestling department, and there is a chance that he submits Jordan Griffin. I think that's a legitimate possibility in this spot. Griffin, though, can be a bit unpredictable in nature, a bit of a wild man out there. As I mentioned, not very technical, but Skelly has advantages on the ground. So I'm gonna pick Skelly here to win this fight. This fight isn't expected to go to a decision at minus 175, so you got to scope out those live underdogs, and I believe Skelly is one of those fighters. I'm going to pick Skelly to win by submission in this spot. Next up, we have, you'll notice there are a few prospects here. You've got Austin Hubbard at 27 years of age. Prepolec, by the way, is 30 with a 12-6 record. We know who he is at this juncture. But Hunter-Azure comes in off of his Contender Series victory, fighting out of the MMA Lab. 7,300 in DraftKings. Montana kid who really looks the part on the tape that you watch. 7-0 record. Now, I'd like to point out, it looks like, as far as tapology goes, that Azure has a significant length reach advantage, 5.5 inches. I'm interested to see if that actually is evident in the fight. Katona should be the better striker by leaps and bounds. Katona coming in at 8,900, fighting out of SBG Ireland. Last time out, we saw Katona get nullified against Marab. Katona is a very cerebral fighter. Comes out with great game plans. He won the Ultimate Fighter up a weight class. Had some solid scraps. I go back to that fight against Bryce Mitchell. I know Bryce Mitchell was pretty raw back then, but this wasn't very long ago. Azure has the ability, when he's on top, to create hell for his opponents, and Katona does possess a legitimate jiu-jitsu game on the bottom. So if he does get stuck there, I'll be fascinated to see what he has up his sleeve to reverse position and pull out some sweeps and how he gets back to full guard as well. So Katona here he's going to be my pick in this spot. I do see a bunch of folks out there on Hunter-Azure. The line has closed to a point where Azure is plus 120 right now. 7,300. I mean, the guy does what you want from a DraftKings perspective. He's going to attempt takedowns. I've seen him go 3 rounds before. Katona, though, doesn't fade. And if they start draining their arms out in these grappling exchanges, I want to see if Katona is able to separate and get distance. That's where he should have a big advantage. So I'm going to pick Katona to win by decision in that spot. Great fight, though. Really looking forward to that one. Katona also the Canadian fighter. So something to pay attention to. Both guys, surprisingly, are 27 years of age. So lots of promise for both of them. Next up, we head to the men's 135-pound division. We have some more prospects on our hands, especially Miles Johns here. Miles Johns, 25 years of age, fighting out of a phenomenal camp at Fortis MMA. LFA fighter, 8,600, minus 140 at the betting window. Cole Smith, 7,600, plus 120. Cole Smith fought Mitch Gagnon last time out, and man, he had to overcome some serious adversity there. I've been listening to the Cole Smith interviews. He comes out and says that he's the best 135er in the world right now. I question that. This fight is expected to go to a decision at minus 175. I understand Cole Smith's the self-confidence. He's riding high with an undefeated record. Looks like he has a good gas tank. Reminds me, he's a grinder. Reminds me of Brian Barberena in a lot of respects. Had to overcome some serious adversity in his last fight, but you could tell he could fight for days if he had to. Miles Johns, when he's on the feet, seems like a spring that's coiled up, and it stays coiled until every once in a while he'll rattle off a 1-2, and that's pretty much his game. In addition to that, though, he does have some legitimate wrestling credentials as well as abilities, and athletically, this guy is the real deal. So, he may be lacking in the polish department as far as if this fight hits the ground, being able to have a wide variety of submissions that he can go to, or transition, or chain wrestle. I'm concerned that his ceiling may be limited as far as options to turn to when he faces adversity. If you watch his fight with, or not his fight, but he reminds me kind of, in a way, do you remember the fighter T. Edwards, who came onto the scene and fought Don Madge and Dennis Bermudez? Similar in a lot of ways to T. Edwards. Though, this is a fighter who is 9-0, and we haven't seen them necessarily wilt under the bright lights. And I have a hard time banking on him losing in this spot, especially considering when he has such an advantage athletically. Cole Smith is going to be the hometown fighter. I like Miles Johns in this spot to get the job done. All right. Next up, we have Battle of Heavyweights. Surprisingly, out of the 7 of 12 fights are expected to end inside the distance, and one of those that is expected to go go the distance is this heavyweight fight between Augusto Sakai and Marcin Tybura. These are big heavyweights. Sakai spent some time in Bellator, lost to Czech Congo, came over to the UFC, beat Chase Sherman, and in a lot of people's eyes, lost his most recent fight to Andrei Arlovski. Both of these fighters have a similar opponent in Andrei Arlovski. Tybura ended up beating Arlovski in a lackluster performance. 8,400 for Tybura, 7,800 for Sakai. This fight currently is lined at -110 right now across the board. Tybura, the Polish fighter who's shown some issues as far as durability concerns, had a loss to Derek Lewis. Man, he ate a lot of shots in that fight. And then also Shamil put him out in his last bout. Sakai doesn't seem to have that durability problem. He has a gas tank, doesn't go to the ground often, has no submission victories, hasn't been finished yet. This fight, I understand, I expect it to go to a decision, and I'm going to slightly lean to Sakai getting the job done. And I think you can do better than rostering Sakai at 7,800. He's gonna need a finish because he's not the highest output heavyweight, and not many heavyweights are high output, but he's got to do a lot to win you a GPP. Tybura may have some chinks in his armor as far as the durability goes. So if someone does get the finish, I would expect Sakai to. But I'm gonna pick Sakai to win by decision. Next up, this is a fight that a lot of the folks on MMA Twitter are torn on. We've got Misha Cirkunov taking on Jimmy Crute. Jimmy Crute comes in as the $8,200 -120 favorite. Misha Cirkunov, 8,000 in DraftKings, +100 underdog. This fight is not expected to go to a decision at -350. Misha Cirkunov has fought by far the better competition. Cirkunov has a significant reach advantage in this spot. Cirkunov is a fast starter. There's a big age difference in this fight. You've got Misha Cirkunov at 32 years of age and Jimmy Crute, 23 years old. Jimmy Crute, 10-0, has yet to taste defeat. Something about fighters who haven't lost. The self-belief is high, as I mentioned with Cole Smith, who named himself as the best 135er on the planet. Jimmy Crute has not done that at the light heavyweight division. Jimmy Crute, I watch his fights, and everything he throws is heavy. He has shown some strong wrestling. I believe he's going to be at a disadvantage against Misha Cirkunov early. Misha Cirkunov has the power, the technical striking, the submission game. Cirkunov, 14-5 record. One thing I noticed about Cirkunov is that he is comfortable being the hammer, but has a real problem when he's the nail. And granted, I mean, these are taking L's against Johnny Walker, Glover Teixeira, Volkan Ozdemir, guys who can put your lights out. But I have concerns about Cirkunov. I have concerns also about Cirkunov the longer this fight goes. One thing I've liked about Jimmy Crute is if he does get stuck on bottom, granted, you never want to see a fighter get stuck on bottom, and Misha Cirkunov does have a high-level submission game, is that Crute, his sweeps and reversals on the ground are very impressive. The way he's able to transition and reverse position. He was in some pretty tough spots against Paul Craig. I mean, that just even saying that brings up concerns because Paul Craig, we know, he's got a great ground game, but Crute had to overcome adversity in that spot and get the late submission there. This fight does take place in Canada. Cirkunov, Latvian fighter who calls Canada his hometown. Now he's in Vegas, though. I understand why folks are on Cirkunov in this spot. There's something about this, though. I have a really hard time pulling the trigger on Cirkunov here. This, in my eyes, is can be a stay away fight. It's hard to avoid it on DraftKings, though, because this fight, I mean, as a minus 350 to end inside the distance, you're probably going to need this to take down one of those GPPs. So I'll be honest, I like the odds better on Crute now at minus 120. At one point, he was up to minus 185. I could see both fighters coming out with the victory here. The way when Crute lands his punches, I know he's not the most technical striker, but when he does land his punches, they do hurt. They do hurt fighters, and I think Crute's got a little bit more in the tank in this spot. I'm gonna pick Crute in this matchup. And I can understand though why folks are laying their money on Misha Cirkunov. I see where you're coming from. So, but I'm gonna be picking Crute here. Next up, we have Antonio Carlos Jr. Shoeface taking on Uriah Hall. Uriah Hall coming in at 7,100 in DraftKings, plus 200 underdog. Anthony Carlos Jr. 9,100 minus 250 favorite currently. These odds were interesting. They closed significantly at one point. I believe Shoeface was down to minus 145 at one point. So it's widened. I understand the hesitation here. Big reach advantage. Actually, sorry, there is no reach advantage here in this fight. Both fighters coming in with a 79-inch reach. We've got Shoeface fighting out of ATT, 29 years of age, coming off of his loss against Ian Heinisch. We watched that Heinisch fight, and I was on Shoeface in that spot. He was making Heinisch work, used that submission defense. The way Heinisch grabbed the cage, I believe that was in the second round. That was a huge moment in the fight that turned the tide. Also, Shoeface had a real problem with Heinisch being so sweaty. He was falling off the top. He was getting reversed. And in this spot, you're taking on a Uriah Hall who comes in with a 14-9 record. He spent, I've heard, up to 6 weeks at Fortis MMA, which is what you want to hear. Great camp. Uriah Hall, another thing to be aware of, he's never been submitted in his professional mixed martial arts career. I went back and was watching his fights. I had to go all the way back to his fight against Chris Weidman, where he was TKO'd in that spot. But he hasn't been submitted. And Antonio Carlos Jr. in his previous fights, you go back his few fights, he's dominated in the grappling department early. And I believe this is going to be a dangerous fight as he closes the distance. But as soon as he gets his hands on Uriah Hall. I think we're going to see a trip takedown, and we're going to see Shoeface advance his position and lock up a choke in the first round. That's going to be my prediction here. This fight isn't expected to go to a decision at minus 240. If you are hedging in this spot, you may want to hedge with Uriah Hall by knockout or inside. Yeah, Uriah Hall by knockout. I believe that was hovering around plus 270, 280, something like that. Uriah Hall has only won 2 fights by decision in his professional career, so something to be aware of. Antonio Carlos Jr. has a tendency to fade late in fights. Uriah Hall we've seen broken a number of times. You go back to the Derek Brunson fight, the Jotko fight. He was, a couple of strikes away from giving up. The getting KO'd. The Mousasi fight. There have been others. Costa. Well, you can't really say much about Costa. Costa was in there. He's a freak of nature, and you could tell that Uriah Hall mentally may have turned a corner. Though this is another guy. I mean, you go back to Smolka, who's had a checkered past. You look at Uriah Hall and he's just holding back. He's you've got to know that you're down on this, that you're going to be losing if you continue to fight this way, and he gets put behind the 8 ball so many times, and that's a low percentage play in my eyes. So Antonio Carlos Jr., I believe he wins this fight more often than not. Odds are a little wide for my liking right now. We got in at minus 170. Now, I'm going to pick Antonio Carlos Jr. by first round submission. Next up, we have Michel Pereira taking on Tristan Connelly. This fight takes place at 170 pounds. Connelly is a natural lightweight, 13-6 record. Connelly is a grappler, 6,700 in DraftKings, plus 420 underdog. Canadian fighter, Connelly, that is, taking on Pereira, who is your definition of a wild man. This guy has some major energy regulation issues. Self-confidence is not a problem. He's got 10 knockouts. Somehow, he's only 25 years of age, and he has a 23-9 overall record. If you are laying money on Pereira, just realize that this guy does try a lot of low percentage techniques out there. Look back at his fights, and Pereira, he fought 7 times in 2018, and he's worth tuning in for. Win or lose, this fight should end inside the distance. Again, this is another one of those fights you want a piece of. If you're on Pereira, he's the highest priced fighter in DraftKings at 9,500, minus 545 at the betting window. I'm wondering how the hell this guy's only 25 years old. I've been watching him fight for a while. He kind of bursts onto the scene, comes in with the black belt. He's got to be the pick here. I'll go by knockout. Came in overweight at the weigh-ins, looked great on the scales. I retract that statement. He did look good on the scales, but he missed weight by a pound. So you got to wonder what was going on behind the scenes. How he could let this happen. But then, again, this is a guy who's fought at higher weight classes than 170 pounds. So huge size advantage for Pereira, and I expect him to get the job done inside the distance. Next up, fascinating matchup between Todd Duffee and Jeff Hughes. We have not seen Todd Duffee in many years. 2015, last time out, we saw him get the lights shut off by Frank Mir. The epitome of a kill or be killed fighter, taking on Jeff Hughes, who's one of the strong style fighters with Stipe Miocic. It makes me wonder if he's a punching bag in the gym. He's at a huge athletic disadvantage. Jeff Hughes is 10-2 overall record. Seems pretty fluid on the feet. 8,300 in DraftKings, -125 favorite for Jeff Hughes. Huge contrast in physiques in this spot. This fight isn't expected to go to a decision at -285. Todd Duffee, 7,900 in DraftKings, +105 underdog right now. I bet DSI. This fight, this is another stay away fight as far as I'm concerned. There are so many question marks about Todd Duffee. This is a guy I've been listening to his interviews all week. Blew out his knee in the tough gym. This is a guy who in his early 20s was on TRT and looked like Godzilla out there. Go back and watch the Mike Russo fight. Incredible how someone of that stature can get unplugged like that. Todd Duffee fighting out of AKA seems like a very bitter guy right now. He was saying things like to Mike Bohn, like, I bet you make more money than I do, and really needs a paycheck apparently. In this spot though, he may get that one because he is a finisher and he's fighting a Jeff Hughes who, frankly, in my eyes, isn't that good. Jeff Hughes, I want to see what Todd Duffee's learned in the past 4 years. Back in the day, I remember watching his grappling matches, and he has devoted significant time to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and wrestling. Todd Duffee, I don't expect him to come in with a gas tank here. This is a first round or bust for Todd Duffee in my eyes. If Jeff Hughes can survive the storm, which may be honestly only about 15 or 20 strikes before Todd Duffee starts to gas out, then I would expect Jeff Hughes to turn the tide. But you're asking a lot from someone who's not a supremely talented fighter. So this is what makes me stay away from this fight. Though, again, this is the problem here. From a DraftKings perspective, you are going to have to pick a spot here. And I'm more of a single entry, 3 to 5, sometimes up to 8, 10 lineups max type of player. And if you're one of those 150 lineup guys, you're going to want a piece of this fight. I don't see Todd Duffee having a gas tank to go all 3 rounds. Jeff Hughes seems to get a little bit stronger, throw volume as the fight goes along. He he lost to Maurice Green in his last fight. Previously had beaten Maurice Green, but I like the output from Green. Output from Hughes. The longer the fight goes, I believe Hughes broke his hand in his last matchup, and that was his first fight under the bright lights. So I'm gonna, the slightest of leans here, pick Jeff Hughes to get the victory. We have no idea what the hell Todd Duffee's been doing in the gym. I don't know how many times he's been knocked out since fighting Frank Mir. There's the possibility that he's been concussed a number of times in the gym. So I'm going to, slightest of leans, pick Jeff Hughes. And if he does get it done, I could see a Mike Russo style finish on him. Next up, we've got the co-main event of the evening. We've got Glover Teixeira taking on Nikita Krylov. Nikita Krylov, 8,500 right now. Well, 8,500 in DraftKings, -135 right now at the betting window. Glover Teixeira, 7,700, plus 115 underdog. 1-inch reach advantage for Nikita Krylov. Nikita Krylov has dropped the ball in a few different spots. He has holes in his grappling game, especially when he's on the bottom. Let's just cut to the chase here. Glover Teixeira, I have counted him out a few times in the past, and he has weathered the storm. Sometimes barely weathered the storm, and then come back and got the finish. Glover Teixeira has one of the most underrated jiu-jitsu games in the business. I got to see it firsthand against Jared Cannonier, how he just basically sliced through Cannonier like butter, and he's done that to a bunch of fighters through the years. Ion Cutelaba, there have been many others. So I watch Krylov's fights, and he has a tendency to he's given up chokes against OSP, Blachowicz in his most recent fight, Misha Cirkunov, etc. And I expect either Glover to get a submission victory or Nikita Krylov to win this fight via strikes. Krylov, he does have a long frame, and he's got good footwork. So we really need to acknowledge that Krylov can stay at range and land significant strikes and could potentially hurt Glover. So you want a piece of this in DraftKings. Either Krylov puts up a high-scoring, volume-based finish, or Glover Teixeira gets that submission victory. I am leaning that Glover Teixeira comes through with a submission here. Look at it. I say that with hesitation though, because look at Glover Teixeira. There's no certainties in this game. The guy's 39 years old. He's taking on a Nikita Krylov who's only 27, who's still growing and learning and trying to evolve, although the same damn thing keeps happening to him. And he's got to really work on his ground game, especially on the bottom. But something we need to take into consideration too is fighters who are evolving. And you look at Hunter Azure, you look at Miles Johns, you look at Austin Hubbard. A few of these guys, we've had a certain time has elapsed between their last fight, so fighters have the potential to improve within fights despite us not seeing it on tape. Okay, my pick is gonna be Glover Teixeira by submission, though I could also see Nikita Krylov winning this fight by knockout. Next up, we got the main event of the evening. Ready to close out the show here in style with Donald Cerrone and Justin Gaethje. Holy cow, what a fight this is going to be. I've been ever since this fight was announced, you talk about fireworks, guys who lay it on the line. This is the one. What can I tell you that you don't already know about this fight? Not much, besides the fact that if you are going to buy into someone coming in with a game plan to finish Donald Cerrone and not stray from that game plan, this is going to be the guy. You look at Alex Hernandez, he was eating those knees as he was closing the distance, had no plan B, could not adapt, actually backed away from Cerrone at certain times of the fight and let Cerrone pick him apart and finish him. Gaethje, you know exactly what he's going to do. I look back at the last few fights. Iaquinta, Al, he didn't pressure Cerrone. He wasn't comfortable in the fire, staying at a certain range where if you're going to get the job done against Cerrone, you got to do it to the body. Point here is Justin Gaethje. We know how many strikes per minute he absorbs. That's a product of his own fighting style. Maybe he knows no other way, but he's been taught another way. You look at his Division I wrestling background. The guy was an All-American. He has a gas tank. I remember against Michael Johnson, he said something like, "I'm gonna push as hard a pace as I possibly can, get my heart rate up to as high as it can go, and let's fight at that pace and see who breaks first." And that's what he's going to do here. I remember granted, they're completely two different fighters, but you look at a dialed-in Donald Cerrone. I go back to the Rick Story fight. There have been other fights where he's been completely dialed in, but he is going to be, if you're on Cerrone, he's going to have to come out with accurate strikes, fight-ending strikes. If he's looking to start jabbing and if he's looking to draw this out, that's not the way this is going to happen. This fight, not to go the distance, open at -300. It's now up to -625. I think you hear Justin Gaethje's prediction. He predicts a liver shot knockout to the body. You go back and watch Jorge Masvidal, the way he finished Cerrone. You watch the way RDA finished Cerrone. You watch the way Anthony Pettis finished Cerrone. This is a guy who has 48 professional fights under his belt and is coming off of a three-month absence where he saw his eye blow up, and he had one round in him versus Tony Ferguson where he went hard and it was a competitive round. After that, a minute into the second round, that was it. Ferguson had turned the tide, and you could see Cerrone start to wilt there. Cerrone's going to have to finish Gaethje early for him to have a shot in this spot. And Gaethje doesn't have good striking defense, so that could happen. I'm going to be picking Justin Gaethje here. I faded Cerrone in the past, and it's cost me. But the leg kicks, the lack of space that Cerrone's going to have, I think that's going to be the issue. And also the pace that Gaethje's going to put on early, I think that's going to be a real difference maker. I could see, there are no certainties in this game, so I could see Cerrone landing a head kick. Is he going to have the space to land the head kick, though? That's the challenge. And since he landed so many of those knees against Alex Hernandez, Trevor Whitman and the crew have had time to come up with a way to counter that plan. And I do have. You want a guy who's going to fight for your money. Both of these guys will, but as far as durability goes, we've seen Justin Gaethje take just about. I mean, look at the damage that he took in those two fights against Poirier and Eddie Alvarez. Even the Michael Johnson fight, he really, you can't dig much deeper than he did in those fights. But there's only so much that the human brain can take. So give me Justin Gaethje to win this fight inside the distance. Want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Want to wish you all the best of luck with your picks. And best of luck in your DraftKings contests. This is Mike's MMA Picks. You can follow me over at MMA Oddsbreaker. Want to thank BetDSI as well as MMA Oddsbreaker for hosting this show. You can also follow me at Capertech and BetMMA.tips. Best of luck again today. Thanks everybody for the support. Appreciate y'all. Thank you.